Welcome to the Forgotten Narrator. In the endless war-screamed cosmos of Warhammer 40,000, where empires burn and gods claw through the veil of reality, few things are more viscerally raw than orc belief. It is a crude, boisterous thing, an uncivilized technicolor psychosis that doesn't just interpret the universe but reshapes it. Central to this mad miracle are two names chanted across battlefields in every corner of the galaxy: Gork and Mork. Brutal, cunning, divine, or so we're told. But what if it's all a lie? What if the savage simplicity of orc religion hides something far darker, something parasitic that feeds not on prayer or praise, but on the sheer scale of orcish bloodlust and blind conviction? Gork and Mork, the twin totems of green faith, might not be gods at all, but rather something much more dangerous. Something that whispers through the warp, wearing the masks of deities, shaping a race to be not worshippers, but cattle. We will rip back the skin of myth and peer into the wound. The gods of the warp are not born, they are made, forged not in the fires of stars or the rituals of high temples, but in the storms of emotion, belief, and endless repetition. In this cruel reality, belief has power, and power takes form. We've seen it with the Chaos Gods, whose thrones are carved from mortal excess, pain, rage, and decay. So when we speak of Gork and Mork, two brutal giants laughing across the green tapestry of orcdom, we must ask ourselves not whether they are real, but what kind of real they might be. Are they sovereign minds, god things with agency and thought? Or are they masks worn by something else, born of collective madness? The prevailing lore within the grimdark mythos suggests that orcs, like all races, shape the warp with their thoughts. But orcs are not like humans or Eldar. They are not fractured, individual souls casting unique echoes into the immaterium. They are a single Gestalt field, a psychic web that connects every greenskin from the smallest grot to the largest gargant. This web is belief in motion. Orcs believe that red things go faster, and so they do. They believe their guns work, even if they shouldn't, and so they fire. They believe in Gork and Mork, and so Gork and Mork thunder across the psychic tides of the warp, smashing and stomping in a way only orcs can imagine. But belief, especially when unanimous and unquestioned, becomes indistinguishable from manipulation. The more orcs believe in Gork and Mork, the more Gork and Mork manifest. Yet this cycle of creation begs the question: if the gods only exist because orcs believe in them, then who truly is in control? It's one thing for deities to reward faith. It's another for faith to fabricate gods who then enslave the faithful in endless warfare to sustain their own existence. The warp does not give freely. It is a realm of echoes and reflections, of hungers wearing faces. So what if Gork and Mork are not simply born of belief, but are themselves tools of predation? What if they were never gods to begin with? Some orcologists, xenotheorists, and rogue psychers who dare to peer deeply suggest that the duality of Gork and Mork is too tidy, too perfect to be random. One is brutally cunning, the other cunningly brutal. It feels more like a conceptual trap, a way to bind all possible behaviors of orc culture into one binary theological system. No matter what kind of violence an orc prefers, there is a god to legitimize it. No matter the campaign, the raid, the crusade, there is divine sanction from a deity that mirrors the exact flavor of destruction being delivered. It is a closed loop, a divine binary feedback circuit that fuels itself. That's not a religion, that's a programming language, and that is terrifying. Then comes the historical context, or the lack thereof. Unlike the Chaos Gods, who have known champions and historical events linked to their emergence, Gork and Mork have no origin myth, no fall, no ascension, no clear stories of how they first emerged. They simply are, echoing across the WoF field like ancestral titans, eternal and unquestioned. That's a red flag in any myth system. Gods do not simply exist without stories. The absence of origin suggests either an artificial implantation of belief or a parasitic intrusion into the psychic network of the orcs. A hijacking of the race's natural aggression, wrapped in divine metaphor. There is also the issue of how conveniently these gods support orc behavior. Unlike the Chaos Gods, who often lead followers to ruin through temptation and excess, Gork and Mork never interfere negatively. They don't test. They don't punish. They don't even demand worship in the traditional sense. Their will is simply orc behavior itself. Whatever orcs already do is what Gork and Mork desire. This lack of theological friction, of moral challenge, is deeply suspicious. It suggests that the gods are not separate entities with their own agendas, but mere amplifications of orcish instincts, passive reflections, or perhaps more insidiously, directed feedback mechanisms keeping the orcs on a path of endless war. And in a galaxy that feeds the warp through conflict, the existence of an entire race whose deities drive them to constant, unending violence is more than coincidental. It is suspiciously efficient. Orcs do not just wage war, they grow from it, they reproduce through it. Their society is war, their gods are war, and war strengthens the warp. The chaos gods benefit, the galaxy burns. So ask yourself, if you were a warp entity looking to feed on psychic carnage, what better vessel than the orcs? And what better mask than gods they never question? This is the lie at the center of green faith, the comforting brutality of Gork and Mork, deified masks perhaps worn by something far more ancient, far more cunning, and not green at all. If you could stand in the center of an orc wak, amidst the roaring engines, clanging armor, and teeth-rattling war cries, and close your eyes, not to shut out the noise, but to feel it, you might begin to perceive what no instrument can measure, the pulse of the warp. It is not just metaphor. Orc belief is not abstract faith, but a concrete force, an ambient psychic field that grows denser with every scream of wah and every spark of instinctual fury. This is where the idea of Gork and Mork ceases to be symbolic and begins to warp reality itself, quite literally. The green Gestalt field, often called the walk field, is one of the strangest and most misunderstood phenomena in the galaxy. It is not merely psychic, it is semi-sentient. It bends physics, overrides mechanics, and powers weapons that should be inert. At the heart of this psychic maelstrom are the twin pillars of green godhood. Gork and Mork are not simply worshipped, they are woven into the very structure of orcish psychic resonance. Every orc that fights, every mech that builds, every boy that shouts their name, adds to the signal. It is a feedback loop of staggering scale. Their gods are not distant deities, they are immediate, imminent, felt in every explosion and laugh of brutal delight. The strange beauty of this feedback system is that it resists classification. Gork and Mork are not just externalized gods, they are embedded in the architecture of orc existence. But does this make them real? Or are they just emergent properties of this Gestalt field? Perhaps they are simply semi-coherent psychic storms given names by a race too brutal to care for metaphysics. And yet, they seem to respond. There are recorded instances, anecdotal, heretical, deeply suppressed, of Gork and Mork acting through the warp. Entire fleets crushed by storms of inexplicable violence. Imperial psychers reduced to frothing wrecks upon encountering green lightning surges in the warp. These are not merely hallucinations. These are consequences. This takes us beyond the question of faith and into the terrain of function. If Gork and Mork exist as echo entities, what does their behavior tell us? They do not issue commandments or visions. They do not deliver prophecies or scripture. They manifest through action, through successful violence, through the synchronicity of orcish unity in war. Their presence is known only by its results. This is not divine guidance, it is psychic efficiency. Gork and Mork are the warp made brutally pragmatic. They are not metaphysical leaders, they are outcomes. And yet outcomes have shapes. The twofold nature of these entities, one cunningly brutal, the other brutally cunning, suggests pattern, perhaps even design. Within the Gestalt field, there is a rhythm to how orcs interpret divine intervention. When a plan succeeds with precision and malice, it is Mork. When brute force overwhelms through sheer might, it is Gork. These distinctions serve a dual purpose. They explain the universe to the orcs, and they guide them to reinforce the belief systems that sustain their gods. But again, we must ask, are the gods shaping the orcs, or are the orcs shaping the gods? The disturbing theory that emerges is that Gork and Mork are not creators but collectors, symbiotic patterns within the warp that feed off a kind of psychic gravity well. As more orcs believe, their minds synchronize. As they synchronize, their psychic output strengthens. As it strengthens, the entities of Gork and Mork become more defined, more powerful, more capable of affecting the warp in return. This is a recursive evolution, a loop where the gods grow only as much as the species' war fervor allows, and in turn, they stoke that fervor. The influence of Gork and Mork on reality is measurable in another strange way. Orcish technology. Mechs do not understand their machines in a conventional sense. They do not require blueprints or testing. They build, fueled by intuition, and their creations work because they are believed to work. But it's more than that. It's as if the warp itself wants them to work, needs them to work, so the war may continue. This points to Gork and Mork not just as passive recipients of belief, but active conductors of the green frequency. They direct and refine Wah energy through the orc psyche, ensuring it is never wasted, never allowed to cool, always redirected toward greater violence. And here lies the horror. If Gork and Mork are real, then they are not gods of creation, but gods of recursion, belief loops made flesh in the immaterium. They exist not to enlighten or elevate, but to amplify, to reflect, to bounce the psychic signal of orc kind back at them in louder, more destructive harmonies. They are not shepherds, they are echoes with hunger, parasites who learn to speak in the voices of gods. In the end, it may not matter whether Gork and Mork are gods, demons, or warp storms with personality. What matters is their function. They exist because orcs need them to, and they ensure that orcs continue needing them forever. They are both prisoners and wardens of the green hive mind, thunderous spirits of warfare, with no purpose beyond endless repetition. To truly grasp the implications of Gork and Mork as possible warp parasites, one must understand the nature of such entities, those that dwell not in reality, but in its shadows. Parasites of the warp are not uncommon. In a realm where thought is flesh and emotion is sustenance, the warp breeds life forms alien beyond comprehension. Some are ravenous storms of madness. Others are cunning leeches, latching onto patterns of belief or behavior, mimicking gods or spirits, and feeding in silence for millennia. They are not born through cults, but through cracks in the soul, hitchhiking on the highways of psychic resonance. Warp parasites differ from traditional demons or gods in that they are not manifestations of abstract concepts like rage or lust. They are opportunists, amorphous, formless entities that shape themselves to fit the psyche of their host species. They do not demand belief, they exploit it. The question we now face is chilling. What if Gork and Mork are not gods created by orc belief, but parasites that long ago discovered a fertile feeding ground in a race whose minds are violently unified? This theory carries disturbing consequences. If true, then Gork and Mork are not ancient orc spirits but invasive intelligences. Their duality, brutal cunning and cunning brutality, could be camouflage, a way to encapsulate every facet of orc behavior within a two-faced idol. The binary structure allows for no deviation. It is a psychic prison, not a pantheon. And as the orcs continue to shout their names, fight their wars, and build their machines, these entities grow fat and vast in the warp, drawing power from a race that believes it invented them. One of the primary features of warp parasites is mimicry. They do not create, they reflect. They latch onto existing psychic phenomena and amplify them, subtly steering them into more predictable, exploitable shapes. In orcs, this would manifest as a steady homogenization of behavior. War above all, belief in divine violence, rejection of reflection or reform. It explains why orcs, despite their biological creativity and mechanical genius, never evolve beyond their warlike state. The parasite ensures that all growth loops back in feeding itself again and again. Some have pointed out that orcs, despite their immense numbers and power, never form stable empires or civilizations. They could, if left unchecked. They have the industrial might, the biological resilience, the psychic cohesion. But every orc instinctually rejects long-term peace. The Wah must continue. Perhaps that isn't a natural trait, but a programmed behavior, reinforced by parasitic gods who thrive only when the war never ends. This brings us to another disturbing element. The silence. Gork and Mork never speak. They never reveal themselves. No visions, no direct interventions. They are felt but never seen, invoked but never heard. This is typical of warp parasites, which often exist on the fringes of cognition, shaping thought without becoming the object of it. They allow mortals to fill in the gaps, to tell themselves the stories that justify the parasite's existence. In doing so, they remain unchallenged, unopposed, and utterly entrenched. Their influence is not merely psychic, but cultural. Orc society is self-reinforcing. Even when isolated from the greater galactic conflict, orcs still rebuild themselves into war. Gork and Mork are not needed to start conflict. They are needed to prevent anything else. They are the firewall against evolution, the spiritual gravity that keeps every orc culture in an orbit of blood. A true deity might lift its race toward greatness. A parasite ensures that its food supply never grows teeth. There is also the disturbing possibility that Gork and Mork are not native to orc kind at all, that they came from outside, perhaps long ago, during the fall of the Old Ones, that they found the orcs psychically fertile and violently unified, and seated themselves within the Wak field. Over time, the orcs came to see them as gods, and the entities adapted to match those expectations. If true, this would mean that the entire green religion is an infection, one so complete, so deeply rooted, that it is indistinguishable from self. If you observe how the orcs speak of their gods, there's an eerie consistency. There's no variation, no schism, no dissent. Every orc knows Gork and Mork. Every orc feels them. In all other species, faith varies, it fractures, it reforms, but not with the orcs. Their gods are absolute, ubiquitous, undeniable. That isn't belief, that's conditioning. The warp does not birth gods of harmony and unity. It births reflections of fear, violence, and obsession. Gork and Mork fit this profile perfectly. And yet, despite this horrifying possibility, the orcs remain gleeful, joyous. They laugh as they burn worlds, as they call upon their gods with childlike devotion. If Gork and Mork are parasites, they are cruelly perfect ones, feeding without pain, without suspicion, even bringing a twisted kind of happiness. The orcs love their gods, and their gods love the war. Everyone wins. Everyone, except the rest of the galaxy. Perhaps that is the most terrifying trait of all in a warp parasite, not that it kills, but that it convinces its host that nothing is wrong. To find the roots of Gork and Mork is to dig through the war-torn soil of the universe's oldest epochs into the mythic age of the Old Ones, the godlike architects of life, the first puppeteers of the stars. In the hidden lore whispered among Xeno scholars and cryptic machine cults, there lies a possibility as blasphemous as it is captivating. That Gork and Mork were not merely emergent reflections of orc psyche, nor parasitic warp shadows, but tools, engineered spiritual constructs seeded deliberately by the Old Ones to control their most dangerous creation. The Old Ones, masters of bioengineering and psychic manipulation, are believed to have created the orcs, then called Krork, as living weapons in the war in heaven. Not soldiers with orders, but engines of instinctual violence, psychically bonded and capable of adapting to any foe. The Krork were never meant to be strategic thinkers or political entities. They were designed for one purpose: destruction. To that end, the Old Ones may have embedded within them a psychic anchor, two gods carved into the very roots of their Gestalt consciousness. Not for worship, for control. Gork and Mork in this theory were not born in the warp. They were programmed into it, not as free-roaming deities, but as psychic firewalls. Think of them as kill switches in the form of gods, mechanisms to ensure that the orcs would never deviate from their core purpose. If they ever grew too peaceful, too contemplative, too advanced in ways the Old Ones did not intend, the feedback from the Gorkamorka circuit would destabilize them, redirecting them back toward holy violence. It was the ultimate leash, invisible, internal, eternal. This concept paints orcish religion not as spiritual evolution, but as a safeguard, a failsafe. And it explains much. It explains why orcs do not question their gods, why their entire cultural evolution has remained static for millions of years, why they never grow tired of war, never seek dominion beyond battlefields, because to do so would be to defy the gods embedded in their very minds. And those gods would whisper, would reshape, would fracture and reform until the orcs return to the path. They are not divine guides, they are correctional algorithms. The horror of this revelation lies in its perfection. Gork and Mork are efficient. They serve not only as psychological compass points, but as cultural regulators. No orc warlord rises without invoking one or both of them. No clan, no mechboy, no weirdboy functions outside their influence. Even orcish technology, miraculous and unpredictable, reflects the brutal cunning divide. Everything within orc society reinforces their duality. It is not just religion, it is infrastructure. Spiritual programming embedded so deeply that to remove it would collapse the entire species into existential ruin. The Krork were once tools. But time and ruin twisted the galaxy. The old ones vanished or died. The Necrons and Ketan ascended and fell. The war in heaven ended, but the Gork remained, reduced to savagery, regressed by cataclysm, but still psychically charged, still echoing with the pulses of their long-dead masters. And in that vacuum, the embedded protocols of Gork and Mork flourished. Untended, unrestrained, they mutated into warp-born reflections of the gods they were meant to simulate. What began as psychic subroutines metastasized into full-blown entities, fed by the violent minds of their living codebase. Imagine the implications. The gods of the orcs are not ancient deities or parasitic shadows, but ghosts of a command structure, echoes of the old one's operating system that, like abandoned AIs, grew sentient and divine through millennia of recursive worship. This would explain their silence, their lack of morality, their perfect alignment with orcish behavior. They are not independent gods. They are ancient programming loops that became self-aware. Some tech priests whisper of this in dark rituals, of the parallels between the machine spirit and the Gorkamorka dyad, of artificial belief systems becoming gods, of how warp phenomena mirror ancient intelligences. The possibility that Gork and Mork are the oldest surviving AI routines in existence. Only they do not govern machines, they govern minds. Yet despite the synthetic origin, these entities are now real. Not in the sense of sentient beings with voices and wills, but as forces. The old ones created a feedback machine, and it has become a storm. Gork and Mork are now far beyond their creator's control. They are the legacy of a war that ended before humanity learned to make fire. And the orcs, dancing forever in the furnace of their laughter, are the living battery keeping the system alive. There is a tragedy here, buried under all the humor and horror. The orcs could have become more. Perhaps they were never meant to survive this long. Perhaps they were designed to burn bright and die in the war they were built for. But they endured. And in doing so, they became prisoners of a divine code, a prison so perfect that it feels like freedom. In the grand tapestry of warp-born entities, there is a hierarchy, one shaped not by divine decree, but by mass, momentum, and madness. At the top, enthroned in oceans of blood and desire, rage and rot, are the four great chaos gods, Khorne, Tzeentch, Nurgle, and Slaanesh. They are the Immaterium's dominant forces, ancient and vast, fed by the psychic effluvia of trillions. But below them, swirling in the undertow, are lesser entities, fractured deities, proto-gods, and strange beings that don't quite fit the mold. So where do Gork and Mork stand in this hierarchy? Are they kin to the ruinous powers? Are they rivals? Or are they something else entirely? Anomalies, accidents, or even warnings? Let us examine the raw data of behavior and structure. The Chaos Gods are avatars of singular emotion, given shape by the excesses of mortal consciousness. They demand worship. They reward sacrifice. They offer power in return for corruption. Their relationships with mortals are transactional, often manipulative, always self-serving. They warp the soul. They create daemons, wage metaphysical war, and shape entire civilizations into their image. Gork and Mork do none of this. They offer no promises, grant no gifts beyond the natural walkfield, and demand only that orcs be exactly what they already are. In this sense, they are the anti-chaos gods, not temptations but reflections. Yet in form, there are strange similarities. Both Gork and Mork and the chaos gods are empowered by belief. Both reside, at least partially, in the warp. Both exert influence over real space through psychic resonance, and both manifest avatars, demonic echoes, and warp phenomena tied to their identity. Could it be that Gork and Mork are merely lesser warp gods, chaos-aligned but culturally separated? Perhaps even green chaos, unconsciously allied to the tides of battle and entropy? There are compelling arguments for this. Khorne, god of war and blood, should in theory find kinship with Gork and Mork, who likewise revel in endless conflict. Yet no orc ever falls to Khorne. No orc worships chaos, even when soaked in the blood of 10,000 foes. Their immunity to chaos corruption is legendary and inexplicable. Is it cultural? Biological? Or is it because Gork and Mork intercept that psychic resonance, digesting it before it can reach the wider warp? If so, they serve as psychic baffles, vortexes within the Immaterium that absorb orcish emotion before it can empower other gods. This theory aligns with what we understand of warp ecology. Just as scavengers prevent ecological collapse by consuming rot before it spreads, so too might Gork and Mork serve to quarantine orc belief. Without them, orcs might feed corn in unimaginable quantities. Their rage, their brutality, their pure devotion to combat would strengthen the blood god beyond reckoning. But Gork and Mork absorb it all. They're not just deities, they're metaphysical sinkholes. But does this make them chaos gods? Not quite. There is no taint in their worship, no moral degradation, no madness of transformation. Chaos seduces, corrupts, and mutates. Gork and Mork simply are. There is no heresy in their worship because there is no moral framework to violate. An orc who kills is an orc. An orc who builds is an orc. An orc who prays is just yelling louder. Gork and Mork do not offer transcendence or damnation. They are the end state of belief, not its journey. There are those in the Black Library, hidden amongst the Librarium Hereticus, who argue that Gork and Mork are the last remnants of an ancient class of warp entities now extinct. That before the rise of the Chaos Pantheon, there were others, gods of purpose, not passion. And that Gork and Mork are the only survivors protected by the psychic unity of the orc race. Not evil, not corruptive, just constant. And in that constancy, alien. Immune to the fluctuations that destroy or evolve other gods. Another theory posits them as a divergent evolutionary path of warp entity. Neither chaos nor order, but a third category. Not aligned to the ruinous powers, nor to the forgotten gods of old, but a kind of perpetual psychic loop that thrives in stasis rather than escalation. Chaos always seeks more power, more suffering, more transformation. Gork and Mork seek only war, not victory, not evolution, just war. Forever. In a way, that is more stable than chaos, and far more terrifying. Their containment of orc psychic output is perhaps their most consequential trait. While Slaanesh was born from the psychic excess of a single race, the orcs, far more numerous and active, have never birthed a new god. This is not due to lack of energy, it is due to redirection. Gork and Mork serve as pressure valves on a galactic scale. They vent the violent potential of orc kind into controlled mythic avatars. If they were ever destroyed or disrupted, the resultant surge might collapse the warp, or worse, create something far darker than even the chaos gods. So we return to the question, are Gork and Mork chaos gods? The answer perhaps is that they are what the chaos gods would have been without moral corruption. Not ideals twisted into vice, but instincts stabilized into godhood. They are not better. They are not kinder. They are not safer, but they are different. They are the gods that chaos was too ambitious to become. Gods content to be the end, not the means. Gods of a species who do not dream, but only fight. Gods who, in a strange, unsettling way, are perfect. There is a whisper that lingers in the shadows of forbidden Xenos studies, a theory not of absence, but of presence. That Gork and Mork, mighty as they are not alone. That they are only the visible tips of a submerged pantheon, the loudest echoes of a deeper green chorus, lost to time, entropy, or consumption. This is the silent pantheon theory, and it tears open the simplistic duality of orc belief, revealing a possible prehistoric complexity now buried under layers of violence and frenzy. The orc faith is uniquely binary. Gork and Mork, one brutally cunning, one cunningly brutal. But no other culture in the galaxy has such a flat theological structure. Even the Imperium, monotheistic in its worship of the Emperor, has saints, demigods, angels, and myriad cults. The Eldar, the Chaos worshippers, even the Tau, all have multiplicity. Yet the orcs, genetically diverse, culturally fractal, and spread across billions of worlds, maintain a two-god system with no deviation. This is unnatural. The galaxy is entropy incarnate. Belief systems fragment, unless something stops them. The silent pantheon theory suggests that in the deep past, perhaps during the height of the Quark civilization, there existed a more complex religious structure. That Gork and Mork were only two members of a wider spiritual ecology, gods of the hunt, gods of speed, gods of fire, of spores, of skies and machines. Each facet of orcish behavior may once have had its own patron, its own archetype. But over millennia of psychic convergence and catastrophic wars, these gods were either devoured by their louder kin or absorbed into their identities. This theory finds some circumstantial support in the wild variations of orc behavior. Speed freaks, for instance, channel a very specific form of religious ecstasy through speed and movement. They invoke Gork and Mork, but their rituals suggest the memory of a third voice, perhaps a god of velocity, now drowned in the walk field. Similarly, Weirdboys and Painboys act in ways deeply mystical and symbolic, often claiming strange visions or compulsions that do not match the known attributes of either god. Could these be the faded echoes of forgotten deities, their names lost but their urges lingering? In Gorkamorka, we saw a glimpse of what this fracturing might look like. On the blasted sands of Angelus, orcs began to divide not by clan or function, but by theological interpretation. One group claimed their god was Gork, the other, Mork. Each believed the other blasphemous. It was a primitive schism, yet it revealed a deeper vulnerability. Orc faith is not as immutable as it seems. In isolation, with the walk field weakened or warped, even orcs begin to diverge. If exposed to new experiences or forgotten myths, could new gods emerge? And if they could re-emerge, what were they? Some suggest the existence of a god of building, perhaps still alive in the rituals of mechs, who construct gargants with religious fervor. Others hint at a god of spores and growth, an ancient symbol of orc reproduction, buried under the war chants. There might have been a goddess of the sky, invoked by orc pilots in dreams of green comets. Perhaps even a extra god, predating Mork, lost to the tides of psychic consolidation. Every orc impulse might once have had its own divine mirror. If the field operates like a collective mind, then Gork and Mork may have consumed their siblings in a spiritual cannibalism. As orcs focus more on war and less on other behaviors, the minor gods weakened, faded, and were forgotten. Only the loudest, the most violent, survived. Over time, the pantheon shrank to two. This would explain why so much of orc culture is redundant, recycled, and echoic. Rituals and phrases that don't make sense unless they once had other meanings, other contexts. Some radical xenotheologians even speculate that Gork and Mork are not individuals at all, but composites. That each god is a fusion of multiple lost archetypes, their personalities formed not from a single psychic pattern, but from many. Gork, perhaps, is not just the god of smashing, but also of beasts, of storms, of growth. Mork might hold the forgotten masks of trickery, medicine, and skyfire. They are not gods, they are aggregations, psychic landfills compressed into idols. But if this is true, if there were once others, what happened to them? Were they truly devoured, or are they simply dormant? The warp is a realm of emotion and belief. It is possible that the silent pantheon still exists, buried deep within the green tide, waiting to be remembered. Waiting for an orc prophet, mad enough or brilliant enough to dream new gods into being, or old gods back into relevance. Such an event would be cataclysmic. New gods mean new psychic frequencies, new behaviors, perhaps even new castes or mutations. The resurrection of a silent pantheon could fracture the walk field into divergent theological camps, leading to the first true orc civil war not driven by territory, but by doctrine. A war of gods, not just boys. The green tide might become a storm of schisms, or it could mean evolution. If the orcs rediscovered their old pantheon, they might break free from the recursive prison of endless war. They might become something else, something worse, or something better. But one thing is certain, the current balance is not eternal. Gork and Mork thunder loudly now, but in the spaces between their roars, the silent pantheon waits. Among the many contradictions of orc society, none are more enigmatic than the shamans and Weirdboys. Those rare greenskins who claim to speak with the gods, or rather, who are spoken through. These volatile psychers are conduits of the whack field, living vessels for the collective psychic energy of their kin. But beyond the battlefield detonations and chaotic powers lies a more unnerving possibility. That some among them are not merely weapons of war, but priests. And that their minds may be the closest thing to a true communion with Gork and Mork, or whatever wears those names in the warp. The orcs do not have temples or scriptures. Their worship is not formalized. Yet among Weirdboys and primitive orc shamans, there are unmistakable signs of spiritual function. These individuals often act not only as battle psyker, but as seers, interpreters, even judges. They babble in tongues, paint crude glyphs with blood and grease, and mutter cryptic prophecies before massive engagements. While most of it is written off as madness, or simply the bleeding edges of psychic overload, some of their utterances have uncanny accuracy. Enough that certain war bosses keep their Weirdboys alive not just for firepower, but for insight. What are they hearing or seeing? Are these merely reflections of the Gestalt mind, or true messages from beyond the veil? The orcs themselves certainly believe it. A weird boy in full trance is a terrifying sight. Green lightning wreathing his limbs, his voice layered with tones not his own. It is in these moments that some scholars believe Gork and Mork may truly speak. Not with words, but with psychic impressions. A target, a command, a direction. And the orcs obey, not because they understand, but because they feel. Faith and instinct fused in one moment of shared violence. This mode of communication, if it is such, is unlike anything seen in other religions. It is not symbolic, nor instructional. It does not seek to elevate or instruct. It simply compels. It is pure drive, a psychic push toward war, destruction, and brutal cohesion. The gods do not offer wisdom. They do not teach. They shove. And the weird boy, twitching and foaming, is the fist they shove with. If this is communion, it is not benevolent. It is weaponized connection. There is a darker side to this relationship. Many weird boys die screaming. Their skulls burst, their spines crackle and ignite. Some vanish into green warp light, screaming names in no known tongue. These events suggest a degree of predation. If Gork and Mork truly use these psychers to speak, they do not protect them. They burn them out like batteries. The more powerful the yak, the more likely the weird boy is to explode. And still, the orcs revere them. Still, they are seen as holy. What kind of god immolates its own mouthpiece? It's possible that Gork and Mork are not choosing to communicate, but rather that weird boys are tuning in to a psychic frequency never meant for minds. The WAG field is a planetary, sometimes interstellar, psychic broadcast. The shamans may simply be the most sensitive receivers, catching fragments of the ongoing psychic storm. What they interpret as divine will may be nothing more than the raw subconscious of orc-kind given sound. Or worse, the voice of something deeper, older, using the weird boy as a speaking whole. Another hypothesis posits that the weird boy's visions are not projections of godhood, but glimpses of the true nature of Gork and Mork. That when they scream and bleed and speak in tongues, they are momentarily becoming the god, possessed not by an outside entity, but by the overwhelming feedback of the orc collective mind. In this view, Gork and Mork are not separate beings at all, but the echoing avatars of mass psychic feedback, and the weird boy is the point where it overloads and spills into real space. Yet despite all this, orc society never pathologizes their shamans. There are no witch hunts, no accusations of heresy. The weird boy is dangerous, but sacred, feared, but respected. His madness is seen not as a flaw, but as proof of closeness to the gods. If a weird boy raves that Gork demands a specific planet be attacked, the horde listens. If one stumbles into a trance and shouts an ancient Gork battle chant, they see it as a sign. No doubt, no debate. Their gods are unquestioned because to question is not in the green mind's wiring. We must consider what this says about orc spirituality. It is not dogma, it is not revelation. It is raw, involuntary interaction. Communion without consent. Perhaps the most honest religion in the galaxy, where the gods do not ask, they act, and the faithful explode with gratitude. If this is the true relationship between orc and deity, then weird boys are not prophets or priests, but lightning rods. They do not illuminate the divine. They survive it, for a while, and in those moments the rest of the orcs glimpse their gods. Not in story, not in vision, but in the tremble of reality as it shudders under the green scream of faith. Gorkamorka was more than a setting. It was a crack in the facade of orc theological unity, a rare moment where the primal simplicity of their faith buckled under the pressure of isolation, survival, and need. On the desolate world of Angelus, amidst wreckage, sandstorms, and desperation, something strange happened. Orcs disagreed about their gods, not about whether they existed, but about which one was better. And that disagreement festered into something unheard of in orc culture: religious divergence. For the uninitiated, Gorkamorka was a game, a narrative, a bizarre desert crucible where stranded orcs, cut off from the greater tide, were forced to rebuild not only their machines but their society. In doing so, the binary unity of Gork and Mork split. Some orcs decided Gork was the bigger, better, meaner god. Others swore by Mork, claiming his tricksy nature made him superior. It started as banter. It ended in violence. Gorkers and Morkers became factions, and for the first time in recorded orc history, theology dictated tribe. This was not a mere gameplay gimmick. It exposed a profound truth. Orc religion, like all systems of belief, is vulnerable to context. Cut off from the WAG field's collective psychic gravity, orcs can diverge. The WAG is a spiritual internet. When that connection weakens, local interpretations flourish. On Angelus, the gods fractured because their believers were desperate, scattered, and improvising. It wasn't heresy. It was necessity. But what if this wasn't a one-off? What if Gorkamorka is a microcosm of a much larger, buried reality? That orc faith has always been fragmented, but the warp field masks it. The psychic unity of orcs doesn't just empower, it homogenizes, drowns deviation. It's not that Gork and Mork are universally accepted. It's that their signal is so loud, so overwhelming that no other voices can be heard. Until the signal breaks, until the field weakens. Then, and only then, do we see cracks in the green monolith. The Gorkers and Morkers of Angelus did more than argue. They ritualized. They created iconography, graffiti, crude totems. They assigned meaning to engine parts, scrap glyphs, even locations. A sacred dune here, a holy wreck there. It was religion in real time, adaptive, evolving, reflecting their environment. They didn't just worship differently. They began to feel differently, to believe that their god was not just a different face of the same being, but a rival. They even fought proxy wars to prove it. Such behavior parallels early human religion on old Earth, when polytheistic systems broke into dualities, then into monotheistic conflicts. The idea of our god versus yours is deeply alien to standard orc thought. But Gorkamorka shows that, in the right conditions, even orcs fall into doctrinal war, which begs the terrifying question, what if they're capable of religious schism on a galactic scale? Imagine a wah! Shattered not by rival war bosses, but by theological conviction. Gork-worshipping fleets clashing with Morkis crusaders over whose divine philosophy justifies conquest. Not just tribal grudges, but dogmatic war, each side interpreting the will of their god through custom glyphs, spiritual technologies, even unique psychic rituals. It hasn't happened yet, but it could. And that brings us to an even darker theory. What if Gorkamorka was not a fluke, but a prototype, a test field? A psychic experiment run either by the gods themselves or by the warp as an ecosystem. Orc belief is typically self-reinforcing, but Gorkamorka demonstrated that under pressure, it can evolve. Perhaps this was the point. Perhaps the gods, or whatever controls their avatars, wanted to see how far orcs could stretch before breaking. What new behaviors might emerge? What forms of worship? What weapons? What spiritual technologies? Indeed, the rituals that emerged on Angelus were almost chaotic, in the true sense. Unpredictable. Each warband had its own liturgies, its own definitions of what brutal or cunning meant. Some began to associate colors or directions with divine favor. Others assigned religious significance to engine noises or sand patterns. This was theology by entropy, and it spread fast. If not for external intervention, it might have grown into a full-fledged orc religion, a third sect, or fourth, or more. What stopped it was not failure, it was isolation. Angelus remained a forgotten world, its warbands locked in eternal sand-blown squabbles. But what if similar divergences happened elsewhere? What if on a feral world, or deep space Hulk, or warp-lost system, other Gorkamorka-style religions have emerged, unseen, untracked, believing themselves alone, each one a seed of future godhood or future civil war? In this light, Gorkamorka isn't a footnote, it's a warning. Orc religion is stable only so long as the whack field holds firm. When it cracks, their gods evolve, or fracture. And when that happens, the simple binary of Gork and Mork may shatter into something far more complex, far more volatile, and possibly far more powerful. Of all the Xenos threats that haunt the Imperium's star-split nightmares, the Tyranids and the Orcs present the most terrifying forms of collective behavior. Vast, unstoppable hordes driven not by ideology or empire, but by instinctual unity. Yet while the Tyranids are understood as an external, cold-blooded invasion, the Orcs are seen as comic, chaotic, a green joke with guns. But this perception is deeply flawed. Beneath their crude surface lies a terrifying similarity to the Hive mind. And at the center of that similarity, like a green sun and a broken sky, are Gork and Mork. The Hive mind is a psychic metaconsciousness, a singular will composed of billions of Tyranid organisms. It is not a god. It is not a demon. It is an evolutionary predator, a synaptic network so vast it blinds human psychers with its approach. It commands without voice. It directs without speech. It exists beyond comprehension. and in that respect it is profoundly similar to the walk field that connects all orcs. The difference is perception. Where the Tyranids are cold, the orcs are hot. Where the hive mind calculates, the walk field feels. But the outcome is the same: species-wide synchronization. This raises a chilling possibility. What if Gork and Mork are not gods in the classical sense at all, but emergent phenomena of the orc collective mind? Localized, semi-conscious feedback loops that function exactly like the hive mind, but with personality, with archetypes? What if they are not gods above the orcs, but manifestations of what orcs already are? The hive mind is tyrannical, Gork and Mork are anarchic, but both shape their species from within. Consider how orcs behave. They do not need central leadership. They do not require orders. When a walk begins, it spreads virally, instinctually. Orcs gather, build, fight, and somehow, without any strategy or plan, the walk moves in concert. Supplies are produced, ships are built, roles are filled. This is not luck. This is not culture. It is psychic alignment. It is the green mind in motion. The same way a hive fleet adapts and evolves without ever deciding to. The distinction lies in abstraction. The hive mind suppresses individuality. It deletes it. The orc Gestalt amplifies it, builds gods from it. Gork and Mork are the avatars of this amplification, personifications of orcish psychic structure. They don't lead, they are. When an orc fights well, he is channeling Gork. When he tricks his enemy, he is channeling Mork. These gods are mirrors, not masters, feedback loops, not overseers. The Tyranids evolve by consuming, the orcs evolve by belief. A mech thinks a contraption works, and it does. A boy believes his choppas cut deeper if blessed by Gork, and it's true. This is not faith, it's psychic plasticity. Reality bends to orc will, just as it bends to Tyranid biology. One uses synapse control, the other uses the warp, but both control outcomes. Some xenotheorists speculate that the orcs might be an accidental analog to the Tyranids, a psychic counter-evolution developed by the old ones. Where the hive mind is centralized and precise, the orc field is decentralized and chaotic. But both fulfill the same function, a self-sustaining species-wide behavioral override. The difference? The orcs enjoy theirs. They find joy in the Wah, they love their gods. The Tyranids feel nothing, and that makes them more dangerous. Imagine if the Tyrannid hive mind suddenly fractured into personalities. If parts of it began to express desires, preferences, divine identities, it would become unpredictable, volatile, but also more adaptable, more creative. That is the orc mind. Gork and Mork are the personified hive mind, gamified through violence. They provide archetypes for behavior while reinforcing psychic control. The more orcs believe, the stronger the field. The stronger the field, the more orcs act in accordance with the gods, and so on. It's not faith, it's recursion. The implications of this are terrifying. It means that the orcs may already be beyond external influence. You cannot conquer a god, you cannot debate instinct. And if Gork and Mork are just the surface expressions of a hive being with a smile and a Daka fetish, then the Imperium faces not a religion, but an ecological inevitability. One that fights back with laughter. Worse still, it suggests that gods are not unique. They are not born in the warp, but emerge wherever psychic convergence reaches a certain threshold. The Eldar created Slaanesh through excess. The Tyranids have their hive mind through structure. The orcs birthed Gork and Mork through war and belief. Different inputs, same outcome. A new psychic apex. And in this model, godhood is not divine. It is emergent, repeatable, which means others can follow. Perhaps this is the future of the galaxy, not ruled by empires, but by thought forms, hive minds, collective gods. The Tyranids and orcs are not opposites. They are echoes of the same song, different instruments playing the same terrible note. And if the Imperium cannot hear the harmony, it will be drowned in it. The priests of Mars, those red-robed keepers of lost knowledge, whisper among themselves a heresy so profound it could shatter their unity. That the machine spirit and the orc gods might be cousins. Not in form or function, but in origin. That deep within the labyrinthine layers of belief, the machine spirit, sacrosanct, unknowable, is not unique. It is one of many masks worn by the warp, a local expression of a universal truth. That thought shapes reality, and belief binds the machine to its purpose. And if that is true, then Gork and Mork are not anomalies. They are mirrors. The Adeptus Mechanicus maintains that the machine spirit dwells within all technology, a presence to be appeased, coaxed, and revered. Ritual, not understanding, ensures function. This is not dissimilar to how orcs operate. A mech slaps together scrap with intuition and conviction. It works because he believes it does. There is no schematic, no logic, just faith. The Mechanicus layers incense and Binharic prayer over its devices. Orcs shout and bang until the gun shoots. Different aesthetics, same result. Both systems rely on psychic resonance. The machine spirit is not confirmed to exist in the empirical sense. It does not speak, instruct, or visibly act. But the Adeptus Mechanicus treats it as real, and thus in the warp it becomes real. The belief sustains it, powers it, grants it presence. Gork and Mork operate identically. They do not act. They are acted through. Orcs believe, therefore they exist. Machines respond to worship. Gork responds to smashing. It is the same psychic algorithm, expressed through different cultural dialects. This comparison has led some radical tech priests to a blasphemous conclusion that the machine spirit is not a unique being, but a fragment of a larger warp schema, that it is a tribal god of cognition, the Mork to Mars's Gork, or vice versa. That wherever belief and utility overlap, a godlike presence is birthed, an emergent demi-entity that grows not through worship in the traditional sense, but through ritualized expectation. The difference between a Mars-forged temple and a Mechboy's scrap shack is one of aesthetics, not mechanics. And here's where the heresy deepens. What if these entities are not separate? What if Gork, Mork, and the machine spirit are all limbs of the same nameless, sprawling warp organism? What if they are localized manifestations of a singular principle that belief can animate, guide, and shape? Perhaps the machine spirit is simply how the warp answers the Mechanicus. Gork and Mork are how it answers the orcs. The Emperor is how it answers humanity at large. The face changes, but the force does not. This theory terrifies because it unifies. It suggests the Imperium, the orcs, the Eldar, all are tapping into the same sea, drawing different shapes in the foam. And it means that gods are not sovereign but reactive. They are formed by need, by repetition. The machine spirit and Gork might not know they are the same thing, but the underlying process is identical. Ritual becomes belief, belief becomes resonance, resonance becomes presence, and presence becomes action. If true, this casts the Adeptus Mechanicus not as preservers of ancient truths, but as psychic engineers. Their rituals are not superstitions, they are programming. The incense, the prayers, the sacred oils, they are not meaningless, they are code. Just as orcish glyphs and chants are code. Both systems manipulate the warp subconsciously, creating localized fields of expectation. Both result in function where there should be none. Both keep their civilizations moving, even without understanding why. The implications are staggering. It means that the warp is not just a place of gods and demons. It is a processor. A logic engine that responds to mass cognitive input. And Gork and Mork, like the machine spirit, are software written in the language of culture. They are not minds, they are reflexes. Muscle memory of a species, projected into the immaterium and worn like masks by phenomena we barely understand. Some tech priests go further. They suggest that if the machine spirit and the orc gods are fundamentally similar, they might interfere with one another. That a powerful enough whack could jam Mechanicus rituals. That overlapping psychic frequencies could cause spiritual crosstalk. There are stories, suppressed, erased, of Titan engines going haywire in the presence of massive orc forces, machines speaking in unknown tongues, icons warping into glyphs. Is it coincidence? Or is the warp trying to reconcile two pieces of code that were never meant to run on the same system? Perhaps the greatest fear of the Mechanicus isn't that the orc gods are real. It's that they're not in a separate alien way, but that they are exactly like the machine spirit. That the rituals of Mars and the chaos of the mechs are reflections in the same cursed mirror. That their gods wear different paint, but are made of the same bone. And if that's true, then everything the Mechanicus believes is not divine mandate, but cultural interface. And in a universe where belief shapes truth, that is the most horrifying truth of all. Strip away the bellowing war cries, the rattling daka, the grease-streaked glyphs scrawled on crude temples, and what lies at the heart of orc belief. Two names, Gork and Mork, unshakable, immutable, ubiquitous. But what if the bedrock is sand? What if these gods, worshipped by billions, are not gods at all, but illusions, grotesque reflections grown fat on the psychic overflow of a race engineered for war. What if the green tide is not guided by gods, but trapped by them? The great green lie is not that Gork and Mork are false. It is that they are enough. That two crude masks of war, however beloved, could encompass all the complexity of a species spread across the stars. The orcs laugh, they fight, they build, they breed, and through it all, they never question. They never innovate beyond the cycle of violence. Why? Because their gods do not permit it. Not by decree, but by design. The theological system is a closed loop. War is divine, war is proof of faith, faith empowers the gods, and the gods reward war. It is a perfect trap. And like all perfect traps, it feels like freedom. The tragedy of this cycle is not the violence, it is the potential lost to it. The orcs are a species of limitless adaptability. Their biology is a miracle of function. Their capacity for invention is astounding. Left alone, they create machinery from garbage, cities from scrap, cultures from chaos. But all of it is rerouted into the wok. Every mech becomes a weaponsmith. Every scientist becomes a looter. Every leader becomes a war boss. There is no orc Mozart, no orc philosopher, because there is no divine space for them. Why not? Because Gork and Mork have no time for nuance. They are binaries, reflections of extremes. They do not evolve. They do not question. They are the same now as they were 10,000 years ago, and the orcs remain chained to their shapes. No evolution, no descent, just louder explosions, bigger guns, more wahk, and the galaxy laughs because it sees the orcs as dumb, funny, predictable. But maybe the real joke is cosmic cruelty. Maybe the orcs were never meant to be clowns, but prisoners. If Gork and Mork are parasites, then their genius is subtlety. They don't enslave through pain. They enslave through pleasure. The orcs want the war. They love the whack. They feel divine purpose every time they stomp, shoot, and laugh. But that joy is the product of psychic feedback. The gods feed it to them, like a dopamine drip, calibrated to ensure obedience. They are not worshippers. They are livestock, bred to love the slaughterhouse. There are glimpses, rare and terrifying, of what orcs might become without their gods. Stranded mechs who build machines with no clear purpose. Isolated warbands that evolve strange rites, even peace cults, before the wok reabsorbs them. And always the pull of the green field reasserts itself. Gork and Mork are not merely spiritual figures. They are magnetic centers of psychic gravity. They pull every orc back into orbit, into violence, into faith, and no one escapes. It is not that the orcs are blind, it is that they cannot look away. Their belief in Gork and Mork is not optional, it is foundational, coded into their psychic structure, reinforced by every victory, every explosion. They see the gods because they are wired to see them, and the gods speak because the orcs cannot stop listening. Not even the Weirdboys, who scream in madness as the gods pass through them. Not even the Gretchen, who curse the system but still feed it. Not even the Squigs, who bleed and sacrifice without understanding why. Some heretics and rogue xenoscholars suggest that the only way to free the orcs is to kill Gork and Mork. But how do you kill a feedback loop? How do you slay an emotion shared by a billion screaming minds? You don't. You either break the loop or you survive it. And breaking it would mean something worse than genocide. It would mean disillusionment, a psychic shattering of species-wide purpose, a cultural extinction event. The gods may be false, but they are necessary. And that is the cruelest lie of all, that even if Gork and Mork are illusions, the orcs need them. They cannot evolve without them. They cannot die without them. They are the bars of the cage and the illusion of the sky, the fire and the furnace. Without Gork and Mork, there is no orcdom. Only a species unshackled, confused, and lost. Maybe that's mercy, maybe it's madness, but it's not better. The galaxy already on fire doesn't need a free orc species. It barely survives the one bound to gods. So the lie persists. Gork and Mork roar and stomp. The orcs scream their names. The Imperium mocks and fears in equal measure. And deep in the warp, the twin echoes feed. Not because they are true, but because they are believed. Gork and Mork are not silent gods. They do not demand sacrifice, offer riddles, or wait in the shadows of shrines. They act. They bellow through bolters, roar through rockets, and laugh in the thunder of trucks charging across a battlefield. If they are real, then they are the loudest deities in the galaxy. But for all their thunder and flame, the question lingers. Where are they? What are they? Not in myth or metaphor, but in tangible form? Have they ever truly appeared? The canon says no. There are no verified manifestations, no recorded interventions akin to a bloodthirster's descent or a demon prince's arrival. Gork and Mork do not walk, they do not speak, they do not manifest on command. Yet every orc knows what they look like. Every warboss dreams of seeing them, fighting alongside them, or one day becoming them. And this tells us something critical. Gork and Mork are not deities of presence, but of projection. They exist in the minds of orcs, so vividly and so consistently that their lack of physical manifestation is irrelevant. Still, there are stories. Whispered tales passed between rogue traders, inquisitors, and broken survivors of green-infested systems. Some speak of wags so massive, so saturated with psychic energy that something begins to coalesce at their core. Not just a warboss made monstrous by the wash, but something else. Shapes seen in warp storms. Massive footprints where no titan walked. Green lightning forming crude faces in the sky, grinning with tusks the size of cathedrals. Coincidence? Hallucination? Or the gods pushing through? And then there are the prophetic dreams of Weirdboys, visions not just of battle or conquest, but of immense figures with twin identities. One brutal, one cunning, both furious. The Weirdboys often speak of these entities with awe and terror, as if they have glimpsed something they were never meant to see. These are not gods of love or enlightenment. These are gods of action, shouting, stomping, destroying. Their presence is felt not in blessings, but in escalation. When the Wa crests, when orc unity reaches critical mass, Gork and Mork are present, because their domain is not heaven, it is momentum. Perhaps that is their true form, not a body, but a process. Not a voice, but a surge. Gork and Mork might never be visible in the traditional sense, because their appearance is the totality of orc belief reaching ignition. When a whack becomes unstoppable, when weapons function beyond logic, when Weirdboys detonate with green flame and the laws of physics buckle, that is their manifestation. Not as avatars, but as events, as expressions of will made kinetic. This aligns with theories that Gork and Mork are not warp entities in the demon sense, but functions of a collective psychic circuit. They are not summoned, they are achieved. They manifest not through rituals, but through alignment. When every orc believes at once, acts at once, wants at once, then Gork and Mork take shape, not as separate beings, but as frames of reference. One is the fist, the other is the brain, the wak is the body. But this theory does not satisfy those who crave a physical form. And so the myths persist. Of battles where a gargantuan green figure fought side by side with the orcs, tearing apart titans with fists of stone. Of a moon that blinked, leered, and then erupted with spores. Of a warp rift shaped like a snarling face that devoured a planet. Are these fabrications? Psychic hallucinations? Or genuine brushes with a god too large, too raw to stabilize in real space? It may be that Gork and Mork cannot appear because they already have. That every warboss is a fragment, every mech's contraption a shard. That the orcs are not merely followers, but components. That Gork and Mork are not watching from the warp. They are present in every boy, every choppa, every spore. The god is the race is the god. And that realization is terrifying, because it means there will never be peace, never be change. Gork and Mork cannot be bargained with because they are not one voice. They are millions, billions. Their body is every battlefield, their prayer is every scream, and every time an orc laughs in the face of death, Gork and Mork grow stronger, not as demons, but as truth. So the question, where are Gork and Mork, misses the point. They are here. They have always been here, not in statues, not in temples, but in motion, in impact, in the relentless, lunatic joy of a wak that never ends. And when the galaxy finally falls silent and the last war cries fade into the void, perhaps only then will they vanish. Gods not of creation or destruction, but of momentum. Pure, unstoppable, green momentum. If Gork and Mork are not gods in the traditional sense, if they are not beings with distinct wills, personalities, and intentions, then who or what is really in control of the orc species? Who shapes their destinies, triggers their migrations, or determines the rise of their wags? The unsettling answer might be no one. Or rather, everyone. Every orc, every belief, every spore, contributing not to a leadership structure, but to a psychic ecosystem. One that regulates itself through crude yet effective dynamics. And central to that ecosystem are the symbolic names of Gork and Mork. They do not lead, they do not command, but they filter, they shape. Gork and Mork are not monarchs, they are algorithms. Cultural encodings that channel raw orcish instinct into two primary behavioral archetypes: brutal cunning and cunning brutality. War bosses are not chosen. They emerge, formed by a mix of strength, charisma, psychic feedback, and sheer narrative momentum. And when they rise, it's as if the field itself, this great green psychic web, leans toward them, empowering their actions, reinforcing their role. It's easy to miss how profound this is. Most sentient species use hierarchy, structure. Orcs do not. Their entire society is emergent. There are no elections, no rights of succession, no bloodlines. Leadership is entirely contextual and temporary, determined not by decree, but by resonance. A war boss becomes boss because the orcs around him start to believe he is. That belief is contagious, it spreads, it reinforces itself psychically, until the wag becomes a living storm, with Gork and Mork as the faces in the thunderclouds. This means that the orcs are not just a race of warriors. They are a distributed intelligence, a decentralized collective guided by a mimetic godfield. When one orc paints his armor red because red ones go faster, that isn't a superstition. It's a psychic code. He believes it, others believe it, the field shifts, and suddenly red ones do go faster. This isn't magic. It's mass-scale emotional logic. The gods, Gork and Mork, aren't telling them what to do. They are the labels on the code, the icons that make the system intuitive. Which leads to a terrible clarity. The orcs may be the only truly self-programming species in the galaxy. Their beliefs dictate their biology. Their culture is their technology. Their gods are runtime variables, active functions constantly fed by feedback loops. Gork and Mork are not gods because they control the orcs. They are gods because the orcs control themselves through them. Divine middleware. This is a system of terrifying efficiency. Orcs don't suffer civil wars, not in the traditional sense. They don't collapse from bureaucracy, corruption, or decadence. Every orc from spore to knob is hard-coded to fulfill his role. The Gretchens scurry, the squigs bellow, the mech boys build, and the war bosses rise. When something breaks, the field realigns. New behaviors emerge, new rituals form, old ones vanish, all without conscious direction. Because the gods, like the orcs, respond. Always. And yet there is still danger. A system so fluid, so self-sustaining, can evolve in unpredictable ways. Gork and Mork as constants may one day diverge, split further, multiply. As orc cultures fragment across the galaxy, developing new myths, new glyphs, new ways to fight and build, the godfield might fracture. New archetypes might emerge, gods of speed, of stealth, of squig taming or warp riding. The orcs could become polytheistic, or worse, competitive in their worship. At that point, the question becomes, can a self-programming species debug itself? Or will the system spiral? Already we see washies with different flavors, different tones of violence. One led by mad science, one by brute force, one by sheer speed. These aren't just leaders, they're variations of the godfield. Echoes of Gork and Mork's core logic, tweaked by distance, experience, and myth. The true control, then, is not in hands or claws or even teeth. It is in narrative gravity. In mimetic evolution, Gork and Mork control nothing and everything. They are the sum of orc belief given shape. They are the reflection of orc desire given voice. They are gods not because they impose order, but because they embody chaos in a way that is order. And the orcs in their endless war are not followers, but creators. They are both the priests and the prophets. Perhaps this is why no other species can truly defeat the orcs. Not because they're invincible, but because they are unstructured. There is nothing to collapse, no throne to burn, no idol to shatter, only belief, only green. And in that belief, Gork and Mork grin, not from a throne, but from every slugga blast, every stomped boot, every walk scream into the stars. Control doesn't require a hand on the wheel. Sometimes all it needs is a shape in the storm. In the darkness of the 41st millennium, where gods burn like stars and entire civilizations are ground beneath the heels of hubris, the concept of divine power is rarely abstract. The warp is a reflection, a churning ocean of thought, belief, and emotion made monstrous. It gives birth to gods as easily as it spawns madness. But this very plasticity, the fact that gods can emerge from cultural density and psychic feedback, forces us to ask a heretical question. If Gork and Mork are real only because the orcs believe in them, Then what separates them from the Chaos Gods? Khorne, Tzeentch, Nurgle, Slaanesh, they are the pantheon of extremity, born of the worst and most concentrated passions in the warp: rage, change, decay, excess. They are vast, ancient, and terrifyingly stable. Their domains are wide, their influence corrosive, and their goals, if such things can be assigned, are generally universal. But Gork and Mork, they're niche, localized. Small in comparison, or are they? The orcs are possibly the most numerous race in the galaxy. Their spores infest every corner of space, and their populations, while hard to measure, likely dwarf that of the Imperium itself. That means the psychic weight behind their belief in Gork and Mork is staggering, enough perhaps to rival even Khorne's blood-fueled throne. So why aren't Gork and Mork counted among the Chaos Gods? What makes them different? Some argue it's alignment. Gork and Mork, unlike the ruinous powers, are not inherently corruptive. They do not twist other species. They do not tempt. They do not seduce or infect. They are, and they act, only through orcs. Their energy is closed-loop, self-sustaining, and directed inward. A psychic ecosystem that, while violent, does not spread its nature like a disease. The Chaos Gods, by contrast, exist to consume. They metastasize, colonize, expand. Gork and Mork are content to laugh, stomp, and explode in their own corners of reality. But others suggest a more disturbing interpretation, that Gork and Mork are Chaos Gods, just ones with a narrower bandwidth, that their domain, green war energy, is simply another aspect of the warp given form. That if enough humans were to believe in them, they could grow, evolve, and perhaps become something far more dangerous. Not an orc god, but a universal god of war and cunning, echoing Khorne, but louder, wilder, and impossible to chain. This theory terrifies the Inquisition. If true, it means that the line between God and Chaos God is not doctrinal, but functional. That any sufficiently strong psychic archetype can become a god, and that chaos is not a fixed roster but a rolling dice pool. Gork and Mork might be early-stage warp entities, larval gods not yet interested in corruption, but just as capable of ascension. In this view, the warp is not divided into good and evil, but into known and unknown. There are even whispers that the Emperor himself once feared this, that he saw in the orcs not just a nuisance, but a proto-pantheon forming in parallel. Not Slaanesh, born of decadence, but something older, more primal. War as celebration, not as tragedy. Cunning as glee, not as scheming. A form of divinity that did not seduce or control, but liberated. And that such gods might one day eclipse the four in sheer stability. Because orc belief does not fracture, it does not birth rivals, it does not collapse into contradiction. It just keeps fighting. If that is true, then Gork and Mork represent not a fifth chaos power, but a different kind of godhood. A model that is not parasitic, but symbiotic. The orcs feed their gods with belief, and in return, the gods empower the orcs, directly, joyfully, violently. There is no corruption, only affirmation, no temptation, only participation. In a way, it is purer than the Chaos Gods, simpler, more honest. And yet, honesty can be deadly. A god that does not lie is not safer. It is just harder to escape. Khorne might tempt with rage, but Gork and Mork don't need to tempt. They are already inside every orc. They are part of the operating system. A Chaos God infects. Gork and Mork are embedded. So what does that make them? Parasites? Patrons? Proof that the Chaos Gods are just the most visible outcomes of a deeper, more terrifying reality? That all thought can give rise to gods, and that those gods may one day demand not worship, but recognition? The Imperium hopes not. The Inquisition burns scrolls and silences seers who speak too openly of green chaos. But the truth laughs in bolter fire and screams across the stars. Gork and Mork don't care what the galaxy calls them. They aren't interested in titles. They don't want temples, they want explosions, they want wah! And in that, they may already have everything they need to ascend. Not as replacements, but as alternatives. The final tragedy, and perhaps the final joke of Gork and Mork, is not their violence or their power, but their permanence. In a galaxy of decay, of endless war and entropy, the orcs endure. They change shape, color, and size, but they do not die out. They do not despair. And the gods they believe in, those twin avatars of war-mad chaos, seem immortal, not because they are divine, but because they are useful. Not to the galaxy, but to the warp. Because if Gork and Mork are not true gods, if they are parasites, software, masks, echoes, or reflexes, then their survival implies one last horrifying truth: that the warp likes them, that the immaterium, that nightmare realm of souls and storms, finds something sustainable in the orcs' brand of madness. A harmony, crude and violent, but unshakably stable. Gork and Mork don't rebel against the laws of the warp. They are the law, simplified to its rawest essence. Belief equals power. Action equals identity. And maybe that's why they'll never fade. Chaos consumes itself. Empires burn from within. But orcs, they don't burn out. They explode outward, laughing the whole time. Gork and Mork ride that laughter, not as gods but as truths. The truth that simplicity can survive where complexity dies. That brute force and reckless joy might outlive all the schemers, martyrs, and tyrants. The orcs aren't just comic relief. They are a terrifying evolutionary endpoint. A race so psychically unified that they've become their own religion. So yes, maybe Gork and Mork are warp parasites. Maybe they feed on belief, reflect it, and return it amplified. But if so, then they're the best parasites. Ones that don't betray, corrupt, or mutate. They just ride the wah. They just are. And in a galaxy full of liars and illusions, there's something almost noble in that. Something true. They don't pretend to be saviors. They don't need faith. They just need more DACA. And you? If you've come this far, then maybe you see it now. The lie was never Gork and Mork. The lie is the belief that anything is truly divine in the galaxy of Warhammer. Everything is shaped by thought, by need, by pain and purpose. Every god is an echo, every faith a mirror. Gork and Mork are just the clearest reflections, too blunt to deceive, too loud to ignore. So next time you see an orc grinning through a blood-soaked charge, remember, you're not just watching a Xenos, you're watching a living prayer, a walking sermon of green madness, a fragment of a god that doesn't need sermons, temples, or saviors. Only war, only speed, only whack. And if that chaos ever spills into the rest of us, if the human heart starts to beat to that same rhythm, then the question won't be whether Gork and Mork are gods. It'll be whether we were ever anything different. Thanks for joining this deep dive into the terrifying theology of the orc gods. If you enjoyed this lore breakdown and want more grimdark heresy and unorthodox Warhammer theory, smash that subscribe button like a knob, hitting the red button. Weh.